What's the real value here if you were to express it to young people? And obviously, you've helped a lot of them with your 12 steps, your book, and self-authoring. But what's pivotal for them to know about themselves, you think, and how they conduct their life?
Well, you should match your ambitions to your temperament.
Right.
If you're extroverted, then you should be working with people, because you're not going to be happy working on your own. If you're introverted, you need a job where you can take a break from people, because introverted people tend to get exhausted by social contact. And so it's hard for them to do something like sales.
Right.
If you're high in neuroticism, then you're going to look for a job that has more security. You're going to want to take fewer risks. If you're high in agreeableness, you want to take care of people.
Right.
If you're low in agreeableness, you tend to want to work with things.
Right.
So, yeah, and if you're conscientious, if you're high in conscientiousness, then that makes you a good manager and administrative type.
Right.
If you're high in openness, then you're entrepreneurial and creative. And those are, it's not like they're exactly fixed, those traits.
Right.
They can be moved to some degree, but they're very strong proclivities. And it's much easier to match you to the job or match the job to you than it is for you to transform yourself to fit the job.
Well, let me ask you that brings up an interesting question I have. There's sort of this debate where people talk about neuroplasticity, and then you have some people who say IQ is completely fixed, you can't change it. Some people say, well, there's some things
you can lower it.
You can lower it. I've heard some people argue, I've heard some doctors argue that improving your short-term memory can improve your scores. But comparing that versus the neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to sort of form, I guess you would say, new neurons, new neural pathways so that you can better improve behavioral patterns, that's a big part of what you do. So how do you as a person learn where to cut that off, that this is my proclivity versus this is what I want to change and I'm capable of doing that?
Well, the problem is, if you're introverted and you want to learn to be more social, you have to learn it from the bottom up. You have to learn the micro skills that go along with it. It's very effortful to move your personality. And with IQ, you can you can think of IQ as breaking into two subcomponents. There's a kind of a rate of learning measure, which would be fluid IQ, and there's a measure called crystallized IQ, which is like an assessment of how much you actually know. You can raise your crystallized IQ by becoming more educated. So if you want to get smarter, let's say, practically speaking, it's hard to change the rate at which you learn. No one's really been able to figure out how to do that. There are these companies that claim that if you do their cognitive exercises, that you'll show an improvement in overall intelligence. But my sense is the evidence for that is very weak.
Right.
Now, but education does raise your crystallized IQ. And so
I wonder, though, how much of that could be learning almost how to learn. For example, I never learned how to learn in school. I never really learned math. My entire 10th and 11th grade, I never opened a textbook. I spent 4 hours with a tutor who sat me down and said, okay, hold on a second. This is how you have to look at these numbers. This is how you look at trigonometry. And then I went, boom, 4 sessions, and I was able to do what I hadn't done all year. Same thing with jiu-jitsu or boxing or any kind of sporting endeavor or doing this show. For me, there's always a learning curve to the ability to learn that activity. So could that
imagine that two people have an equally competent teacher. Okay, the person with the higher IQ will learn faster.
Right.
But if you have a good teacher, that's going to be helpful to both of you. So obviously the manner in which material is presented is of crucial importance.
Right.
It can be presented badly or well. I had the same experience with you when I was taking statistics in university. Mm-hmm. I was having a hard time with it, and I sat down with the tutor for about 6 hours, and he laid clear for me a variety of things that I hadn't learned, and made it very straightforward. So and there is evidence too in the teaching profession that conscientious teachers in particular, I'm talking about at the elementary and junior high and high school level, can have a marked positive effect on their students.
Right.
Although teachers tend not to be selected on that basis, which is really too bad because we do know how to select better teachers.
Sometimes they're punished on that basis. My senior English teacher, his grades were too high. It was really, his name was, he may not want his name being used in this show, so I won't use it. But I remember he was very, very clear. This was my English professor teacher, senior year. You read a book every semester. Mm-hmm. You had a written test on reading comprehension of the book. You had to write an essay, a literary essay in the book. Then you had one oral, a persuasive essay, and then you had one other test that you do, a written test that was more so a test on the English language, writing skills. And then there was 10% of your grade that was simply writing every single day in a journal. That was it. You knew this every single semester. And I remember his first 2 semesters, all of his students were engaged. I mean, kids who typically were not engaged in class did very well. I think the average grade was maybe something like 85%. And the administration told him, your grades are too high. So he lowered them 5 points for the next semester just because they had him do that. That to me seemed antithetical to what a teacher should want to do. As a teacher, you should want every student to get 100% at the end of the year in a perfect world.
Yeah, well, it's hard to assess teaching proficiency, and so we tend to do it very badly. And that really is too bad. You asked earlier, too, why these results are useful. They're useful. It's useful to also know the results for your partner, because then you know what motivates them. So, for example, if you have a partner who is not particularly engaged in novel and exciting things, it could easily be that they're low in openness or low in extroversion. You need to understand that that's part of their temperament and not them just being arbitrarily difficult to get along with.
Right.
But it also helps you motivate people and understand them. Like if you're married to an introvert, if you're married to a, sorry.
No, it's okay. You caught it from me. It can even be caught by Skype.
Yeah, I should have never come on this damn show.
Never.
So like if
there it is. That was a smirk at the beginning. You were waiting. I got it now. Okay, let it out. Let it out.
Well, if you're in a relationship, there's going to be places where you have conflict because of your temperament, and understanding that the other person's actually different from you can depersonalize that to some degree. So, for example, if you're an extrovert and you're married to an introvert, you need to understand that the introvert actually can't tolerate too much social contact. It exhausts them. And so when your partner has had enough of the party or even enough of your house guests and needs to go be by themselves for a while, it's not because they're being mean or ignorant or difficult to get along with or any of those things. It's just that they are wired so that they need time to recoup by themselves.
Yeah.
And if you're a disagreeable person and you're married to an agreeable person, one of the things you have to learn is to not be too pushy and harsh, because the agreeable person won't do a very good job of negotiating for themselves. Now, they'll do a really good job of taking care of you, and they might do a really good job of taking care of children, although they could also foster their dependency, which is the downside of agreeableness.
Yeah.
But it can alert you to the fact that you may have to modify your behavior to take the other person's temperament into account.
So how do I just convince my wife on the openness, like the Vietnamese sex hammock? Is there like a process?
That's on the perversion scale.
That's on the perversion.
Yeah.
Now, see, I'm seeing you high in the judgmental scale, Dr. Peterson.
Yeah,
I'll have my
very, very high, very high. I'm judging you as I sit here. All of you, in fact.
Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is not a judgment-free zone.
But now you've made that public. She's going to be very happy with you.
I don't even know what's a thing. It's just a colloquialism.
See, now that's exactly it. You're impolite. You make that comment about your wife, and now you feel guilty about it because you're all
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Watch Good Morning Mug Club live every Monday through Thursday at 10:15 Eastern.